Hello friends, welcome back to our tour of Leslye Headland's mind. I hope your shots are up to date, and I see that many of you are wearing duck waders, which honestly, it's a smart plan. I would advise everyone, please keep your hands to yourselves. You really don't want to touch anything in here. Today's video is part 3 in what has become a 4-part saga on Star Wars Acolyte and its creator. I'll link the first 2 parts and the 4th down below in the future. Last time we showed how Leslye is an intense narcissist and sexist who also refuses to manage her projects because that is oppressive somehow. That led to a disorganized mess of a show that couldn't appeal to most men or women, and especially not Star Wars fans. Today, we'll be examining Headland's moral compass to discover how the writing got to be so flat and unrelatable to any well-adjusted person. Today's mental spelunking will have 3 parts, time-stamped for your convenience. Speaking of convenience, how easy is hitting that like button? You know what I mean? Like it's probably lit up right now, like a rainbow. A rainbow in the dark! Yeah! I don't know, it just felt right. A large problem in entertainment right now is that much of the landscape is plot-driven. This happens, then for some stupid reason, this other thing happens, just to create artificial tension. Most productions don't have quality characters that you can relate to, and so you feel disconnected from the string of random events that are playing out on screen. This issue is heightened in The Acolyte because the characters don't merely behave stiff or unnaturally, they are adhering to a code of values that you are entirely unfamiliar with. Headland eschews firm principles in seeking to justify herself, which results in her creating individuals who are not only unrelatable and downright unlikable, but also boring, because the story has no objective. Everyone is living their truth, and there is no good or bad, so why care? Heading back to one of the Bonkers Collider interviews, after she explains the casting of Manny Jacinto, she continues on about relating to his character. First, we get her admission that the villain's speech was a self-insert. Quote, "So when I was rewriting the scene with him all the way up to shooting, I was on the treadmill being like, what is he gonna say? And my wife, who was a huge part of my creative process, finally she said, what do you want to say? Stop thinking of it like you have to somehow tap into a different guy." And again, Manny was giving this incredible performance all through this. So I'm like, how do I live up to this performance? My wife was like, what do you want to say? I was like, I want to say that people don't want me to exist as a gay woman, as a woman in this particular space, working in this wild sandbox. There was a whole crew of people who believed in me, but deep down, I felt like I am unaccepted for who I am because of what I believe in and wanting to wield my power the way I'd like without having to answer to the legion of people that just exist out there. Okay, right away we see the reaffirmation that she had no idea where the show was going or what the motivation even was for the villain. Also, another reminder that while everyone on set supported her, deep down, she was still unhappy because her ego won't let her rest until the legions of people out there also accept and love her. This is odd though, because in other interviews she does state that she doesn't go online very much, so how does she know about this oppressive them that doesn't want her to exist? Doesn't matter. Her psychosis requires an ever-present enemy, so she feels like she's a righteous revolutionary or something. But the real problem is in this final paragraph, she doesn't simply identify with this villain, Kamir. She doesn't believe he is a villain. He's only a victim of the system, yearning for freedom, as we all do, she thinks. Quote, by the way, I think everybody feels this way. I think that's why it resonates when you're honest about yourself and you get personal about it. When he says, I want freedom, that's what I want. I just want freedom. I want to be able to just be out there and be myself and be the type of artist I want to be without having to answer to anybody. That's why I feel so close to him. For those of you that haven't seen it, let's play that speech.
What do you want?
Freedom. The freedom to wield my power the way I like, without having to answer to Jedi like you.
I'm sorry, it's not very long. I can't use the whole thing in one go, so... Okay.
I want a pupil, an acolyte. But this one went back on our deal.
Sorry, one more quick break. That's good.
She exposed me. So now I have to kill every single last one of you. I don't make the rules. the Jedi do.
So now you know that is the freedom that she is referring to.
You keep using the word. I do not think it means what you think it means.
Leslye thinks this is relatable and humanizing. He helps murder 2 Jedi and then personally dispatches several more a few minutes before that speech. So what we know about him is that he's a killer. The freedom that he speaks of is the freedom to murder and pillage however he chooses. But Leslye connects with him because, as she stated twice, she doesn't want to answer to anyone. It's not really surprising she clearly didn't want to answer to the audience who would be watching this show, because it's not a show, it's a video diary by Leslye for Leslye. She doesn't think Kamir is bad, doesn't think his motivations are selfish, and doesn't want to answer to any of you plebs who disagree. We saw in the previous video, she doesn't even think you're real fans. I wonder why no one is connecting with this show. There's also another strange statement at the end of this quote about women directors not being allowed to cry, and once again, the source is her gut feeling, the general vibes that are out there, I have no idea what she's on about this, especially. I cried on camera talking about Puss in Boots 2. I got 0 comments for that. However, I did probably get a pass because that movie made everybody cry. This Leslye rabbit hole has been interesting, to say the least. But to recover from this, I'm going to do Puss in Boots 2. Long form, baby. I'm going to get into the details. I think that is the best film of the decade. Yeah, not movie, film. It is an actual masterpiece. Anyway, once again, doesn't matter if the culture exists. She simply wants to feel countercultural, which is why the villain is her avatar. My villain is shopping for glasses. Come on. Okay, I'm furious. This isn't exactly what I was going to do here. Whatever, we're just going to do the thing live, all right? We'll do it live. These glasses that are on my face, I bought from Warby Parker. I'm working with them for this video. Call me Patrick. I have never heard of this company. Figured I'd try them out. Now I see that for too long, I have been buying my glasses at my eye doctor, which I cannot stand. I feel like I'm stuck there. I never know what to pick. They all... So the Warby Parker site has this frame style survey. Filled it out, they sent me suggestions, or just shop the whole website if you want. They've got an app, you can try them on virtually. You pick 5, they show up in this box. Now this is all free, by the way. You get a return label. You don't have to buy any of these. So I tried these on. These are my originals, and I really have a type, huh? Tried to get out of my comfort zone with these little guys. And I would like to get back in that zone now. These though, the Burke model, I bought these. They have sunglass options as well if you're cool like me. Both of these look pretty good. These are just testers, they all go back. You choose the ones that you like, you put in your prescription, choose the options that you want. I got blue light filtering because I'm at a computer, always. Then, a couple days later, my new ones came in. You can use your vision insurance, use pre-tax money with your HSA, FSA. I am mad because I paid substantially less for, I have been getting fleeced at my eye doctor, and this was more convenient. There's a QR code on your screen, there's a link below. This is totally free to get a try-at-home kit. You will save time and money. I actually did spend my own money on these. I needed new ones. But Leslye isn't only the villain, she's the hero too. I wasn't exaggerating when I said this is for her, by her. The interviewer affirms that the villain is a great way for a writer to get their feelings out, and Leslye replies, quote, absolutely. I very rarely put myself into the protagonist because I think the protagonist has to be the protagonist. They might have a sprinkling of me, certainly Osha and May, the family conflict, the switching of sides, being really certain that you know one thing, the betrayal of the father, the rejection of the fraternal protectionism, and saying, I am now my own person. That stuff I definitely relate with, but the stranger is my shadow self, for sure. Okay, so she rarely puts herself into the protagonist, but she relates to every major theme that the twins are supposed to represent. Her so-called sprinkling encompasses their entire character arcs and development. However, she thinks Kamir is her shadow self, so she is both the antagonist and protagonist. And they both have redeeming points. Everybody's good in their own way. Except the Jedi.
Why? Because them, that's why.
In this area, the interviewer is praising the 2 simultaneous fights in episode 8 and the double leg cross that transitions into a lightsaber cross because the director recently heard about Space Odyssey for the first time and wants to emulate it, but the writing doesn't back up the parallel between the fights. We saw in the previous video that this is because she added this fight after Manny came on board. We'll skip this ludicrous middle section for just a second to look at her thoughts on May's journey. Quote, I'm also rooting for May because she was framed by everybody. She was on a quest to find justice in her own way, knowing that the institution would never hold these people accountable.
That's actually murder. It's one of the worst crimes of all, so also illegal.
Semantics.
As you'll see, Leslye automatically thinks of the Jedi as bad, no matter what, and assumes that you will agree. So, if you don't have daddy issues and problems with religion that you're projecting onto the Jedi, like her, you probably won't get it. She says May was framed, but the show she wrote shows that isn't true. She claims May is on a quest to find justice. Also not true. She's out for revenge and has been planning it for 16 years. If the show felt a little off to you, congratulations. It's because you're a well-adjusted adult who doesn't see premeditated revenge murder as justified, especially when the Revenger was part of the original problem. But Leslye needs to justify herself, so the traditional good guys need to be brought down. In her mind, the Jedi are wrong, no matter what they do. Like when Master Trinity tries to stop Master Chugi from being mind-controlled. The interviewer in this Nerdist article wants to know how exactly the witches all died when the mind control was broken. Which is a great question that I think everyone would like the answer to. Sadly, Leslye has no clue. They had to die because the plot needed it, but she does try to bluff her way through. Quote, "This was a big question when we were working on the episode. To me, it was very important because it told two stories. One, that Indara, despite her being completely and utterly the consummate Jedi in this episode, I did feel it was important that she also misjudged something. If we were going to explore those themes, she couldn't just be this infallible Jedi. She also had to have something else going on with her. And I think what she did is, in the moment, in trying to sever the connection between Kelnaka and the witches, she dealt with a power that she did not understand and was not familiar with."
That doesn't mean anything. Those are just words.
If Leslye wants to run for some sort of office, I think she would do just fine. That was an incredible display of using many words to say nothing. However, it does tell us that A, she doesn't know how to write a complex character, so she genuinely did tack this scene on because she realized Master Trinity was flat. But B, she thinks this shows moral grayness, which is again why the show looks stupid. She thought this was a big moment, illustrating an ethical dilemma, but I don't think anybody watching saw that. The interviewer confirms that she did indeed kill all the witches, and it was not intentional, and Leslye explains how it showed Master Trinity's selfishness. You heard that correctly. Quote, "No, she did not know. All she was thinking was, I have to save him. Again, it starts to become a selfish want. I must save this colleague of mine. I have to do this. If I don't do this, then something terrible could happen to him. We've seen what they're capable of. I've seen them do this to my Padawan. They're now doing it to an incredibly powerful Jedi Master. What do I do? Okay, I'm going to make this decision." But she doesn't know what the consequences of that decision will be. The same way that Sol doesn't know what his actions will mean for Osha's future. Torben doesn't really put together, because he's so young, that the consequences of his actions are going to lead to all of this falling apart. Indara had to also make that mistake in order to continue exploring that idea.
You have such an interesting mind. So creative.
Okay, let's get this straight. The Jedi see these kids go into the Witch Fortress requesting that the kids be tested. Seems a little rude and presumptuous, but not overly threatening. The head witch mind controls the Padawan and threatens the Jedi.
If you want your Padawan returned to his right mind, I suggest you all leave. Now.
After this tense standoff and threat, everyone agrees to meet later for lunch and test the girls for some reason. After the testing, Master Squid Game, the Padawan, and the witches all make the rashest decisions possible in order to create tension. Rather than telling Master Squid Game that one of the girls is going with them, the witches yell at and threaten the Jedi. Because a massive fire has simultaneously and inexplicably begun to engulf the stone fortress, the head witch begins to transform into an eldritch smoke monster. Squid Game kills the monster that is evaporating a child before his eyes. The other witch runs away, and the rest of the witches mind control Master Chugi, who then begins to attack the two Jedi, clearly trying to kill them. Finally, the script allows Master Trinity to arrive on scene. She sees Master Chugi attempting to kill his own team and severs the mind control.
Somehow
This kills the witches. In the Carnival Funhouse distorted mirror room that is Leslie's sense of morality, Master Trinity is acting selfishly here. In Headland's world, taking decisive action in a combat situation to save the lives of your team from enemy combatants is selfish because the enemy might get hurt. There might be unintended consequences. She paints the need to save someone's life in an emergency situation who is actively being attacked as a selfish want. This is what she thinks is moral tension, and it's because she has no ethical North Star, and because she hates her father. Jedi, sorry. Because she hates the Jedi. Perhaps if she can somehow retcon the Jedi as not good, then perhaps she, who identifies with the Sith, can be relatively not bad?
You can see yourself as the bad guy and there's still good in you, and you can see yourself as the good guy and there's still a little bit of bad. And that's something I hoped to imbue into the story.
You are a bad guy, but this does not mean you're a bad guy.
Right here, you're seeing the disconnect between the show and the audience. If you watched it, you might have been thinking something like, why didn't the witches tell the Jedi immediately that Osha was going with them? Or, after everyone saw the Padawan get mind-controlled, why didn't the other Jedi Masters mentally prepare and shield themselves? Or, how is that fire spreading so fast through a stone fortress? But Leslye, imagine your first thought would be, wow, this is such a tense philosophical quandary. Did Master Trinity do the right thing by breaking Master Chugi's mind control and preventing her team's death and dismemberment? Back to the middle section of the previous quote, we see that she thinks there are serious ethical dilemmas where there absolutely are not. Quote, but here's the thing. On an emotional level for the audience, now having watched episode 7, you've got the light side and the dark side, Jedi and Sith. But who are you rooting for? Am I finding myself now rooting for the stranger who I feel incredibly drawn to, who's made himself literally exposed? And Soul, who's been hiding this thing. So that sort of emotional impact of like, I hate what Soul did, but this is the bad guy. He's got the red lightsaber. What am I supposed to do? With the girls, it's similar. Who am I rooting for? I'm kind of rooting for Osha because I want her to restore her strength in the Force and tap into her negative feelings, but I'm also rooting for May because she was framed by everybody. She was on a quest to find justice in her own way, knowing that the institution would never hold these people accountable. First, I wasn't rooting for anyone. That's the serious issue with this kind of postmodern moral relativism. Stories are bland because everyone is pretty horrible and no motivations are relatable or admirable or striving for virtue of any kind. In fact, there is no virtue. That word has no definition. Since we use phrases like my truth and that has seeped into story writing, we now have conflict with no meaning. If everyone's truth is equally valid and there are no principles to base our actions on, why would you care about the story? Why should I care about any of these people and their struggles when one result is no better or worse than the other?
There is no good or evil. It depends on what side you're standing on.
Also, Leslye thinks the audience will have trouble knowing who to root for because Kamir got naked? He allowed Osha to follow him to the pool, left his saber and clothes behind, then put himself in a position where she could enjoy the passion of revenge, kill him if she wanted, then told her to question the Jedi Order. Leslye says all the time how this makes him so vulnerable and human because she wants her self-insert to be justified. But to a sane viewer, this is obvious manipulation, just like he was obviously manipulating May by never showing her his face and guiding her around with his bumbling, goofy Kamir persona. Here she is in another interview saying that when he encourages her to give in to her anger and sadness, that's not manipulation by a Sith, it's simply being tender and caring. He's being honest, helping her restore her spiritual foundation. Sure, okay. But back to the supposed confusion of who we're supposed to be rooting for. You got Kamir, then you got Master Squid Game, who's moping about over a crime he didn't commit and over not saving a twin that he should have, but the script told him he had to lift the bridges instead of the girls. Why would I root for either of these guys? Why is she phrasing the Osha and May bit like it's an either-or situation? They both suck. Child May was a rage-filled animal abuser before the Jedi showed up, and she was not framed. And then, Leslye wants Osha to tap into her negative feelings?
What is wrong with you?
See, this is why the show was never gonna make sense. In Star Wars, the Sith are the bad guys. They give in to passion and negativity. It's their creed. The Jedi are the good guys. They practice self-control and self-denial, which are widely agreed to be virtuous traits to those of us who aren't psychotic. But Leslye thinks you're going to watch this show and root for Osha to go to the dark side. Well, actually, sorry, it's really not the dark side. Her shadow self will sum it up for us.
That's the path to the dark side.
Semantics.
Yeah, see, Kamir is not a bad guy. In fact, he's sort of a hero when you think about it because he's fighting against the fascist Jedi. I know, that didn't make any sense at all. Leslye, could you explain this?
When he says the reason I'm doing this is because you say I can't exist. Like it's a very almost countercultural idea for, you know, I rewrote that scene so many times. So he ended up being essentially very anti-establishment, which is obviously what the rebels are and the resistance is in Star Wars normally. But once I locked into like, oh right, he's the voice of the, yeah, the counterculture of this era.
Postmodernism is a cancer. And this right here is one of the metastasized tumors that has infected Star Wars now. There's so much to work on, but I'm also working on a video history lesson about the progression of these ideas, this critical theory, postmodern, intersectional, the power structure is always bad and fighting against it is always good by comparison attitude. But right here is a prime example of the disgusting place that it can lead. You can tell yourself you're the hero by labeling yourself as countercultural, then finding something else with that label that is obviously right. In the original trilogy, the rebels were resisting the Empire, the oppressive, authoritarian space Nazis who built the genocide orb and blew up a whole planet just to demonstrate their power and intimidate all detractors. How did Tarkin put it?
Fear will keep the local systems in line.
Yeah, and they were being led by a Sith Master Emperor who had orchestrated the sci-fi Kristallnacht of his enemies and manipulated his way into authority, employing his all-black wearing Death Knight as an enforcer when needed. Since that was in power and the rebels were fighting them, I suppose that, like, if you stood kind of far off and you were squinting and you'd had a couple of drinks, you could call the rebels countercultural. But then trying to keep that template and say those in power bad, those fighting them countercultural and good, when discussing the Jedi versus this random murdering wannabe libertine, well, that doesn't work. This is the issue with postmodern thought. Authority is bad, because it is. Power, when exercised by the powerful, is wrong. Obviously. You don't have to justify that position. And so, by extension, if you say you're against the bad guys, then you're the good guy. Thus, we have Leslye performing mental gymnastics that Simone Biles couldn't even dream of to arrive at the conclusion that Kamir isn't a bad guy because he's countercultural, just like the original rebels. Also, in our next section, we're going to pick that interview back up as she talks about the Jedi in conspiratorial tones because they had unchecked power that led to hubris. They had a lot of influence, so they must have been bad, somehow. If you don't bring these attitudes with you, like Leslye did, that's why you don't get this show. Her language about the character journeys shows that she is not like most of the audience. Take a look at her description of Osha's arc in this Inverse article. First, she's going on about the ending scene again. She's extremely proud of it, and she obviously loves Fight Club. Seriously, her talk about the movie combined with how she writes women, if she were a guy, she would be a neck-bearded incel Reddit moderator. She would have an entire collection of fedoras. So many swords would be on her wall, okay? She also missed the mark on that one by a mile. The Fight Club ending had impact because of the setup in the movie. The Osha and Kamir sunset meant that the writer really likes Fight Club. You seeing the pattern right here? Tyler Durden is not a role model. He is a warning. But Leslye identifies with the I'll burn it all down because I feel like it character. Anyway, at the end, she describes the lightsaber they're holding as, quote, the representation of her ascension into dark-sightedness. That is a terrifying phrase. She sees Osha's story as a hero's journey where she finally attains freedom, as she sees it. Who's going to empathize with this, guys? It's not even a quality villain arc. She stumbles into it. As we examine in video 1, she is literally led around for 7.5 episodes. And when she finally takes a single step, it is straight to the D side. And it's supposed to be an ascension? You don't relate to Osha or even understand her motivations because you are a normal person who understands that giving up everything to satisfy your passion is wrong. It's a bad idea. You don't root for people whose journey is simply, be more selfish, think about me more. Even our favorite anti-heroes have some kind of motivation that we can empathize with or at the very least understand. Osha is none of that, but Leslye thinks she's really something. In this Collider interview, they were discussing how the twins switched sides, and Leslye explains, quote, Osha had to embody this rage and despair. What rage and despair are we talking about here? Most of the show is her looking blank. Here's the montage again from video 1.
find the Wookiee, and it was hard.
Of vulnerability.
You're the violent one. You started that fire. They've turned you against me. That's the path to the dark side.
It's the Botox. I can't show emotion for another hour and a half.
It's time to make things right.
I'm sorry I started that fire.
Some of that was May, I think, but it's hard to tell. Leslye tells us about their place-switching journey. Quote, Amanda is kind of split and does it very, very subtly and emotionally charged. But how are we going to get them there? Oh, indeed. So subtle, her performance is barely perceptible. I did look closely, though, and I found something, I think. Okay, so she's choking her father figure right here. No, that's totally blank face. Okay, here. He's dead, and she slumps to her knees for a few seconds. Then Kamir comes over to be so gentle, not manipulative at all. And then she swings at him. Then the mood ring saber turns color, and she is surprised. I'll admit when I'm wrong. We did see about 9 seconds of what I could call despair, and then about 4 seconds of rage. So it is definitely there. She also didn't know what to do with May, because the story was never about her, so who gives a crap anyway, and explains. Quote, that's also why I really felt that the memory wipe was important, because I felt like May had to become completely docile. Not sure how she became docile just by getting reset back to when the Jedi came to her coven. She was a violent, animal-abusing pyromaniac when we met her, but whatever. Leslye explains how the character journeys don't have to make sense. See, you only need to force the right story beats. Quote, the challenge was, we're going to start with this former Jedi, and we're going to start with this aspiring Sith. They're on opposite sides of the spectrum. We always knew that May was going to end up with the Jedi, switch places, and Osha was going to end up with the Sith. The difficult part was charting those story beats to get them there. What are the story beats to support those journeys? And I really feel like we achieved it.
I tried. I couldn't do it.
This journey that she talks about for May is non-existent. If you have to reset a character with a mind wipe at the end, you did not write a journey. But the important takeaway here is twofold. One, the characters never dictated where this would go. The script did. That's a writing 101 no-no. But Leslye forced it because she only wanted to justify her own self. That's the second point to note. She doesn't see morality as an absolute. She wants it to be something that you glide around on. It's no big deal. Osha gets her version of a hero's journey and is on the bad side. But that's good, you see. Osha shouldn't have to answer to anyone. She's free. The character that ends up on the good side sounds like she got lobotomized and is under the wing of Master Director Spouse, who we are supposed to believe is abusive and we've seen to be conniving. Leslye sees morality as something you can bounce around on freely. Sometimes it's literally a switch you can flip. In this Vulture interview, she explains how she forced everyone to do it. Quote, I like the idea that all the major players switch, either side or personality. The stranger starts out as a murderer, and then by the end, he's super gentle. You see his feelings about Osha are about making himself vulnerable. Soul starts out one way, and then it's revealed that he's a different person. It was fun to do that with a smaller character like Pip, for him to literally go from blue to red, and now he belongs to May. Even this guy has switched sides. There is just so much nonsense and BS in these statements. Okay, first of all, how is murderer and super gentle a switch? How are those opposites? Like, if you volunteered at a children's hospital, does that mean that you aren't the same person that killed multiple people last week? She keeps emphasizing that he's so sweet and gentle and vulnerable because, remember, he is her shadow self, her avatar. Of course she sees him as a great guy with, one or two little homicidal flaws, but a heart of gold.
Let's not bicker and argue about who killed who.
Her feelings about good and bad are so flippant because she doesn't want them to be that serious. She groups Soul into this switching discussion to imply that he was actually bad or evil when he wasn't. Everyone can move about the spectrum at will because, right and wrong aren't that big of a deal. And that's what makes it such a big deal that this is now Star Wars. What we've seen in this section is a person who is desperate to justify themselves. Leslye does not want to believe in such archaic concepts as right and wrong because she doesn't want to answer to anyone, as she said earlier. She continually attempts to muddy the moral waters and then declare that we can never know what is correct, while at the same time trying to paint the Jedi as bad. All of this is nothing more than an attempt to make herself feel like a good person, or, at least a relatively better one. The natural consequence of her ethical obfuscation is a story that has 0 point. If the ethical seatbelt sign is off and everyone is free to move about the spectrum, then why does their conflict matter? If no particular philosophy is better than another, then why should the audience care who wins? These are the issues inherent with a person like Leslye that makes her unable to tell a Star Wars story. This is why it was doomed from the start. Hey, earlier I just wanted to jump right into the video, but now I'm excited to introduce you to Harvey the Hedgehog. Got him from Barnes & Noble. Look, he even has a little acorn hat. That's so cute. I gotta up my mug game because apparently I'm not the only one who has fun mugs. This guy, Jarrell at Sungrain Studios, he's got fun mugs too. I think he's trying to show me up. Wait, how do the kids say it? He's mogging. No, he's out mug-mogging me.
I'll tell you here and now, I will never be out
mug-mogged
again.
But beyond her total inability to tell right from wrong, she also doesn't understand what moral complexity is. This, of course, stems from her broken compass, but she also has confused hubris with moral ambiguity or corruption. As we just saw, she believes the show is full of ethical grayness when it isn't. And in one instance, the interviewer even calls it out, wondering what the Jedi did wrong to the witches, and Leslye tries to bluff her way out, saying, "I'm glad it read that way for you," as though it were mysterious or multifaceted. She then goes on to deliver a word salad about the spectrums of morality to cover for the fact that the main conflict in her show doesn't justify that quest for justice that May was on. In the next third section today, we'll examine this idea of moral relativism or ambiguity and how it's been done correctly elsewhere. But in this section, let's look at this hubris she keeps bringing up and her continued implication that the Jedi are somehow corrupt to show that hubris does not equal corruption. Further, we can see the story of the Jedi arrogance being their downfall was already told, starting 25 years ago with The Phantom Menace. Leslye keeps insinuating that the Jedi have done something bad only because they are large and old. Let's pick up that earlier interview right after she defends the homicidal Khmer as being countercultural. Leslye, what do we need to know about the Jedi?
The counterculture of this era. Which is why it's so important to go through those first 4 episodes, because I think if you don't know what this world of Star Wars, the High Republic, is like, which we haven't seen in live action, you have to understand that the Jedi are not the Jedi that they are in the prequels. They're not the Jedi that they are, pre and post Battle of Yavin. Like they're in a different space where they're operating with less oversight, number one, and they're also operating with, I think, a little more hubris.
Hang on, let me stop you right there. Number one, the first 4 episodes didn't show any of that. I covered this in video 1, but I think that she wanted Yord to convey the cocky young cop who is by the rules and wants to be tough like the older cops, because the Jedi are supposed to be space cops and child protective services in this one, but he's the only one. So he looks like an outlier instead of indicative of the whole order. Secondly, she keeps bringing up the lack of oversight and hubris of the order, as though that should immediately clue us in that they are up to something. Glenn, how far do you think she's going to stretch this hubris argument? To the limit. Yeah, I think she's about to start reaching real hard. Okay, Leslye, please enlighten us to the supposed self-righteous attitude of the Jedi.
First, hubris, like, of course, we're doing the right thing. We're doing the right thing. This is how we've always done it, and that's the right thing. Of course, we're, when we seeing them on Brendok and seeing how they negotiate the issue with the witches and how children may be recruited by them. I mean, I know that sort of the idea, if I can sort of unpack it, I'm assuming that the idea was that parents give up their children almost as an act of public service, like we have a poor sensitive child, they would be better with you guys to train, et cetera, et cetera. But I think if, like Mother Anastasia and like Manny's character, they don't align their beliefs with the Jedi, and I'm assuming that there are some Force users that don't, would they see children going to the Jedi as a good thing?
Sorry, hold please. Here again, we have that postmodern critical theory training coming on through. She says they are telling themselves they're doing right because it's how they've always done it, and that means it's wrong. You see, past power structures are wrong. No explanation needed. The bourgeoisie are evil because they are the bourgeoisie. Duh! She points to the way the Jedi negotiate on Brendok like it was just self-evidently horrible. We did have Master Squid Game sneaking around, being as creepy as possible, but as I recall, Master Trinity requested permission to test the girls, and that was after the head witch mind-controlled the Padawan. In her show, the Jedi are presumptuous, but even in her own writing, they don't impose that much. I am certain there were people in the galaxy who didn't want to give their kids to the Jedi, and that doesn't tell us anything about the Order. But please, Leslye, tell us how the Jedi are so wrong in your mind.
To me, it was important that the audience understood all of that, that like there's this whole other way of looking at this world that isn't Qui-Gon getting Anakin out of a horrible situation so that he can become a Jedi. So it's a positive coded transition to, well, maybe that was a really positive situation, but perhaps there were other ones that were not. And did the Jedi learn from that? And when they did learn from that, is that why when Anakin shows up, they're like, he's too old to train. Like, we can't, we've learned that this doesn't work, I don't know. Those were the things that I was interested in.
Okay, all right. This is just more narcissism. I get it now. She wanted to affect the prequels. Look, I did everything first. The Jedi won't train Anakin because of my twins. I mean, the Jedi have existed for 25,000 years. But her story is the first time they learn that kids are impossible to train after a certain age because they form too many attachments. Okay. She also implies that her forced choke is the first one as well. Like, I think her ego slows time for objects that get too close to it.
I wanted to set it in the time period that we did 100 years before The Phantom Menace because, one, it won't step on any legacy characters. It won't step on any of the canon that is being explored right now with the Empire, the Resistance, or Rebellion.
Well, the lie detective determined that was a lie.
A story about people who are averse to the Jedi and won't give their kids up to them sounds fascinating. I would love to explore a different philosophy within the Star Wars universe. Kind of wish she would have told such a story. All I saw were Jedi being comically stupid and cocky, like somebody was trying to make them look bad on purpose, which in no way informed me about other groups that don't agree with them.
Someday those noble intentions you all have will destroy every Jedi in the galaxy.
The issue we're seeing here is twofold. The first is that none of these other ideas are present on screen. Even the insinuation that the Jedi are not morally good isn't there. But the second and more serious issue is that it's only that, an insinuation. You just heard Leslye say that she's interested in these various ideas, that maybe Qui-Gon rescuing Anakin from slavery was positively coded, but perhaps there were others that were not. Maybe. It's possible there are bad situations where the Jedi aren't the good guys. Could be. They are powerful. We've seen they have laser swords and mind tricks. Lots of hubris, apparently, so I guess it's enough to simply suggest and imply that there is a possibility that they weren't entirely right. What a great basis for a show. The other issue with this take is that the Jedi are not in power. They answer to the Senate, even in her show.
I think the Jedi are a massive system of unchecked power, posing as a religion. A delusional cult that claims to control the uncontrollable.
That is supposed to be creating all this tension in there. This senator comes in and delivers Leslie's thoughts out loud.
We don't control the Force.
Not the Force. Your emotions. You project an image of goodness and restraint. But it's only a matter of time before one of you snaps.
Only barely restraining himself from looking dead into the camera while he does it. As we'll discuss in the next video, Leslye hates the Christian church and sees the Jedi as a stand-in for them. She is projecting this idea of a powerful church whose members are secretly corrupt but protect their own and can't be trusted, even if they put on a nice outward face. Trouble is, the Jedi are not the Vatican. They are a blend of mostly Eastern religion and philosophy, far more akin to, like, Shaolin monks. They practice intense material detachment, seeking guidance through meditation. They would have served as diplomats, mediators, spiritual guides, or, peacekeepers during this era. However, while they train in martial arts, and I do think bringing in the kung fu element to the fights in the show was a cool idea, they were like guardians, defenders, or deputies. The Jedi were not all powerful, and relative to the size of the galaxy, were extremely small in number. Just like in the last video, I looked all this, it's not hidden. This is not secret information, you guys. I found it easily. None of this matters because Leslye wants self-justification through the destruction of something good, so she seems better by comparison. Well before the show started, she was already telling us about her flimsy reasoning for her portrayal of the Jedi in this Collider interview. Quote, I think it's difficult to do a show that is critical in any way of the Jedi, and I think that you saw that with Rian Johnson's film. You know what I mean? Like, I think that, especially in that moment, people were very nervous about saying this particular institution may not be the light and perfect, stunning group of heroes that are totally nobly intentioned. And one thing that I think Dave would say is that they are fallible. That's really the story that George told with the prequels, right? The fall of this particular group.
Well, if you remember Einstein's theory, sir, space is curved. Yes. And these are smart weapons.
She keeps trying to insinuate that there is some kind of hidden corruption in the Jedi, but nobody's buying this. Yeah, they are fallible. Yes, they were overconfident. Yes, they had blind spots. None of that equates to moral ambiguity or corruption, however, even if you put the two sentences next to each other like that quote. Hubris says nothing about ethics. It says nothing about the Jedi philosophy. And it was barely demonstrated in the show. This show is a meandering mess that goes nowhere, which is the issue when you don't have any moral moorings. The only thing you can do with a large organization that has rigid codes and prides itself on its honor to the point that it is full of hubris is demonstrate how that legalistic attitude allows evil to slip in undetected because the organization is not looking inward.
Impossible. The Sith have been extinct for a millennium.
I do not believe the Sith could have returned without us knowing.
Which is exactly what the prequels did. The Jedi are so certain that the Sith cannot possibly be alive. They are so convinced that everyone shares in their dream, except for the odd Nihil raiding band or some Outer Rim nonsense, but in the core of the Republic? Not a chance there's evil lurking there. They are certain. Sure, inventors are weird and eccentric, but a galaxy-famous ship designer can't be evil, right? Merchants and bankers are shifty, but certainly one of them isn't close to harnessing the powers of life and death. Politicians, selfish and greedy, but certainly, if one were a powerful Sith Lord walking amongst them, they would know. Ironically, Kamir's speech about everyone not sharing the Jedi dream would have made for an intriguing lead-up to the prequels, showing the behind-the-scenes evil growing while the Jedi are unaware because they have been lulled into complacency by 1,000 years of peace. That would give depth to the Empire takeover, showing that it wasn't entirely fear that kept everyone in line, but perhaps there was a general discontentment with the Republic and the high spiritual standards of the Jedi. Maybe, after 1,000 years, a new post-structural philosophy appears, something humanist, or whatever word you would adapt for Star Wars purposes, and more people are turning against the Jedi in favor of themselves. Of course, Leslye, nor I believe Kathleen, could ever approve of such a story because it ultimately would explain how such attitudes lead to ruin and oppression like the Empire. So their only angle left is to attempt to defame the Jedi. And because Leslye is dying to pretend that her show informs the prequels, she couldn't bring herself to pitch a story set 20,000 years ago when perhaps the Jedi weren't so monk-like, because they were constantly at war with the Sith. The Acolyte cannot fit into the Star Wars universe, especially at this time, because there is already too much evidence that the Sith are evil. They are oppressive. What's sad is that if moral relativists weren't at the helm, Sith stories could be fun to tell. During this time, the famous ones were hiding in plain sight. Wealthy, powerful public figures who were doing a reverse Batman, waging a secret war for evil at night. But in order to tell their stories properly, it would have to be clear that they were, in fact, evil and selfish, which Headland is not able to do because that would suggest that she is evil and selfish. I mean, if I knew that dozens of girls were being fed to a predator, but I looked the other way in order to advance my own career, I suppose I'd want morals to be relative as well. The prequels certainly had some issues. There is plenty of fair criticism on those. However, they did nail the themes of how the Jedi fell. The Jedi were not corrupt, but they were susceptible to manipulation, as long as they could think they were acting in wisdom and defending peace. Separatists are threatening the Republic. Freedom is at stake. All right, they must act and help guide the situation as generals and mediators, positions that they would be suited to. Obviously, we know that it was a ruse and they walked right into it.
The time has come.
execute Order 66.
Their long history of success also rigidly blinded them to what Anakin was going through, and they couldn't see his change or take it seriously because you either get with the Jedi way or you're out. They couldn't take special consideration for this kid or be flexible in any way. Their path has worked for thousands of years. Annie needs to get with the program. Again, this doesn't paint them as corrupt or even say anything about their principles, but it does show how their rigidity can be manipulated. It is very obvious that Leslye wrote Osha to be in the pattern of Anakin, but reverse. She's unable to let go of attachments, like him. She can't stick with the Jedi way, like him. But in her story, Osha is justified and right. It was the Jedi who were uncaring and secretly covering up a heinous crime. It's like Leslye watched the scene where Anakin says,
"From my point of view, the Jedi are evil,"
and thought that was a captivating concept to run with. Except there's no ethical ambiguity there. That scene is designed to show us how Anakin was manipulated. It's not the Jedi who have changed. It is precisely his point of view that has changed. And it's meant to illustrate how the Sith used his emotions to turn him to the dark side. It was a very clear lesson, really hard to miss. However, this view still is reading into the situation too much with an intent to paint the Jedi in a bad light. Anakin's fall wasn't supposed to illustrate the danger of having high, rigid standards. It was a cautionary tale about the seductive poison of lust in all its various forms. Anakin wants more power.
Is it possible to learn this power?
He wants control.
I will even learn to stop people from dying.
He wants respect.
This is outrageous. It's unfair. How can you be on the council and not be a master?
He wanted that booty.
You will not take it from me!
I'm not saying that he's right. I'm saying that I understand.
You mad sweet on that back meat.
More like Padme, I'm a dally with it, am I right? Where was I going with this?
It's not my fault, I got distracted.
Right, okay. It was all a lust for something, some attachment, some control, and it was not entirely sexual. We're going to get into this much more in the next video, but there's this weird need in modern Hollywood and its marketing arm, which we still refer to journalism for some reason, to make everything sexual. Granted, in human history, it does play a big part, and it is part of Anakin's story, but it's so gross that you have contributors like this at Screen Rant who are excited to see a character's motivation for going to the dark side be so shallow as wanting to bone. In media, being literally seduced into something is usually shown to be a stupid move, and with good reason. It's usually guys, and it illustrates a lack of self-control and a mind so short-sighted that the promise of a 30-second ride is enough to rope him into an evil plot of some kind. Base person makes base decision with terrible consequence. It's an old tale. That's why memorable villains are usually after some grander plan, because even when you're writing a bad guy, you know that his evil plot being get laid is pretty frickin' thin. Here we have Leslye talking about how she liked that Obi-Wan described Vader as being seduced by the dark side and seems to want that to mean sexual seduction. Her mind is clearly a nondescript room with only a sticky pleather couch in it. The prequels showed this so much better, with more depth. We see that Anakin and Padme are sleeping together, but that's not what turns him to the dark side. He's forming a loving attachment. They're going to have kids. He wants to settle down. It's not a one-night stand after he sees her naked in a pool. There was a slightly weird vibe, though, because she did kind of mother him as a kid.
Don't even get me started about Oedipus. Let's just say that you do not want to be at his house over the holidays. It's awkward.
His fall was about the lust for power, to protect those things and keep for himself whatever he wanted and was attached to. That is what Palpatine takes advantage of. He promises Anakin the freedom from the Jedi oppression that would take away what he loves, tells him he shouldn't have to answer to the Council. Hopefully you've seen in this section that while Leslye desperately wants the Jedi to be innately bad in order to justify herself, she was unable to show it and tried to simply suggest and insinuate it. She is correct, the Jedi have weaknesses, but she didn't show those either, instead trying to piggyback off the prequels, which did show their weakness and downfall due to manipulation. This is why she can't write a good Star Wars story, because at her core, she doesn't agree with the moral structure of that universe and wants to subvert it. In Leslie's quest to subvert the Jedi, she employed the most banal technique in all of storytelling. Hey, you know this thing that works this certain way? What if, are you sitting down? What if it worked the opposite way. Not only have we seen that Leslye doesn't even have a tenuous grip on morality, which is a requirement if you're wanting to explore its complexities, but she also seriously thinks it's deep to ask, what if good guy really bad and bad guy really good?
Wow, yeah, that's heavy, Ogre.
This is another tired postmodern tool, subversion. What if we turned everything we're used to upside down? Wouldn't that be cool? Ed, what do you think? You're right. It's not cool. Not on its own. This is why evil Superman is usually boring, unless you do something with the concept. Now, the visuals kept me from watching past season 2 of The Boys, but up to that point, evil Superman was done pretty well, because it wasn't just, what if Superman bad? It was, what would result if a toddler was given everything he ever wanted because the adults were terrified of his superpowers? What if Superman had an ego that required him to act good even if he didn't want to because his need for acceptance outweighed everything else? What if someone drank milk in the most disturbing way possible? And it was coupled with the subversive idea of superheroes being a corporate commodity, so it made for an engaging story. But the basic concept of evil Superman, that's not interesting on its own. Just like the idea of the Jedi being secretly bad all along is not interesting on its own. Let's get a little refreshment, shall we? Leslye failed at exploring morality, but there have been a number of amazing examples. In this section, we'll be showing what moral complexity should look like to contrast just how badly it was fumbled in The Acolyte. Let's start off with an ambiguous story about who is ultimately responsible for criminal behavior and if bad actions can ever truly be redeemed with Dostoevsky's Crime and Punishment.
It's a good idea. It's just pretentious enough.
Yeah, no, that's fair. You're fair. I heard it as I was saying it. I did. Okay, let's go with A Clockwork Orange. This film is not attempting to justify Alex relative to anyone else, but it is asking the question of how much punishment society can inflict on a person relative to what they did before that society is also called bad. Alex did one of the most horrible things that I can think of, so does that mean that society's treatment of him is okay? Furthermore, can his good actions be called good if he's being coerced into them? At the end of the movie, we see that he is not changed inside, but is that because he is corrupt permanently or because his rehabilitation was flawed and forced on him? Once again, we're not told Alex isn't bad. We're not lazily trying to relativize his crimes. We are asking who shares responsibility with him and what our reaction to him says about us. Through Alex, we indirectly get questions about justice and society. The Acolyte hoped to indirectly question the Jedi through Osha, but didn't bother to tell us what happened with her in training, just that she couldn't let go of attachments and washed out of Jedi school. Leslye, speaking through Kamir, tells us that Osha should absolutely lean into her emotions. This is when she's telling us that he is not manipulative. Quote, I think he's telling her the truth. When he says semantics, I think he means it. He's just like, why wouldn't you use what is obviously the part of you that needs to be explored the most? Why wouldn't you lean into that? Why would you continue to suppress it for really no reason? The Jedi threw you away, so what are we still doing? What is this thing you're thinking? You don't owe them anything. You owe yourself to start living your life and recognize your own strength in the Force. Do you see how that is not complex? It doesn't raise questions about the Jedi, or honestly even the Sith. It's just, hey, what if you did whatever your emotions told you to? What if what's right is whatever you feel like in that moment? Okay, what's to explore there? How is that question going to make for an interesting story? If you want to watch that idea play out, just go watch TikTok and Instagram Reels. Contrast that with an idea about morality being a luxury or something that some societies don't allow for. In the first season of Jack Ryan, Wendell Pierce and Jim Halpert are trying to find the wife of a terrorist to gain information, and they're forced to work with a pimp to locate her. As they're driving along, Jim is staring daggers at this guy, Tony, so Tony brings it up.
You think you're the good guy, I'm the bad guy. Maybe you're right.
Once again, can't use the whole thing in one go, so I will tell you that Tony is about to continue.
But maybe, if I was born in a nice city in America, like Cincinnati, I could be the good guy too.
He seems convinced, and he has a deep-sounding proverb about it.
Geography is destiny, my friend. The world is the kiln, we are the clay.
Wow, let me write that down.
The show never answers this question for you, and obviously Jim is not buying this idea that this guy was just forced into running a brothel against his will. Just the hand fate dealt him. But a non-monologue question is whether working with him was right at all. They paid this criminal for information, money which will certainly help his trade, but it did lead to the wife and ultimately prevented a serious terrorist attack. So, were these guys right to work with Tony? Would they still have been right if the attack was not prevented? This is an interesting trolley problem being explored, comparing two moral paths balanced against their possible outcomes. Leslie's trolley tracks are simply comparing two people and asking, who do you want to win? Look back at her question about who we're rooting for between the homicidal Khmer and the guy who's hiding things, Sol, or between the two expressionless heroines with no motivation who go where they're told. We aren't exploring anything here. There are no interesting questions raised or perspectives examined. Recall her statement about competing views in this universe.
Well, maybe that was a really positive situation, but perhaps there were other ones that were not.
She didn't show any of those other ideas, but even if she had, what does that say? There are more ideas. Great. That doesn't cast doubt on the established good guys, the Jedi. Reminds me of a picture that you'll see sometimes where two people are pointing at a number on the ground, each saying it's a 6 or a 9, and the text will say, keep in mind, everyone has a different perspective. But that's really stupid. It's one of them. Obviously, they need to figure out why this number is here. It has to mean 6 or 9. Can't be both. Only then could you ask questions about whether it should be the number that it is, or if painting it on the ground was a good idea or not. The search for an examination of truth begins with the understanding that truth exists. And the people making this stuff, they don't believe that, which is why they can say,
there is no good or evil, depends on what side you're standing on.
The ability to speak does not make you intelligent.
If you're looking for another great one to mull over that does show multiple perspectives intelligently, highly suggest watching Arcane. Among its many skillfully employed techniques, Arcane uses color to reinforce its ideas. The two main magic systems, for lack of a better term, are colored blue and purple to differentiate them, but are next to each other on the color wheel. This strengthens the writing's depiction that they are more alike in spirit than the characters want to admit. Leslye also tried to use color to reinforce points in The Acolyte, but went about it in the most ham-fisted way possible. Plus, you can't reinforce a point that isn't written into the show. In this Collider interview, the interviewer is praising Leslie's use of costume to convey ideas, and Leslye explains, quote, there was a lot of planning around that. The witches being purple was a big one, because purple doesn't show up too often in Star Wars. It does a lot, but you don't see major characters. You think of Attack of the Clones. Zam Wesell wears purple. Palpatine wears purple. It's kind of unknowing, like, what are people's alliances and who are they? So yeah, there was a lot of thought put into who was going to be what. I know I've used this joke for something else, but Leslie's description of this show is like a can of LaCroix. It claims to have a flavor, and if you concentrate on that label, you might be able to convince yourself that it has, suggestions of that flavor, but it's not actually present. All right, first, Palpatine wears purple because he sees himself as an emperor, like Caesar. Am I off here? She's making me second guess myself. Was that not clearly the imagery for Palpatine? Having heard her earlier statements on morality, are you now seeing why she would want to see Palpatine in purple as meaning not knowing his alliance? But the second point to note is that her idea of creating intrigue is putting purple on characters because it's a mix of blue and red, the classic Jedi and Sith colors. That is supposed to tell the story on its own, I guess, because that idea did not appear in the show. Headland wants the Acolyte to be so deep with shades of gray all throughout, but what we got was the same coat of landlord beige slapped over every hinge and outlet of this production. A movie that had me guessing about characters' loyalties was Training Day. I just watched it this year.
Hey, I just saw Heat.
It's probably because I'm so used to the sympathetic villain switcheroo that for some time I kept waiting for Alonzo to be justified somehow. All the way until the end, Alonzo was explaining himself, and he had me going for a while. When you watch it, you also might wonder if Jake should have bailed at many points during the day. The ending seems morally straightforward, but it also leaves you with some questions about the nature of justice and how much one has to participate in corruption in order to fight crime. What kind of ends are needed to justify the means? War movies usually explore this idea as well. Hey, war is hell, and how much of your humanity are you willing to sacrifice to achieve peace? is that even the real goal?
How can you shoot women, children? Easy. You just don't lead them so much. Ain't war hell?
I would love to see a Star Wars remake of Training Day where like a jaded ex-Mandalorian Alonzo works in the Death Stick crimes department. You may recall Elan Sleazebagano from episode 2. He was a small-time Death Stick dealer trying to peddle his filthy wares onto Obi-Wan.
You want to buy some Death Sticks?
You don't want to sell me death sticks.
I don't want to sell you Death Sticks.
You want to go home and rethink your life.
I want to go home and rethink my life.
Well, in this new story, Elan did go home and rethink his life. He decided he didn't want to be a little guppy anymore, but a big fish in the Death Stick game. After some shrewd setups, allowing some of his competitors to accidentally get de-limbed by Jedi Patrol, Elan begins to work his way up the black market ladder. He invents new Death Stick delivery mechanisms, death patches, death vapes, death bath bombs, most insidiously, apple spice flavored death lattes. Now that last one will allow him to corner the market and rise to kingpin status. All the while, Coruscant is unable to track down this mysterious new drug lord, and the paperwork for the bodies he leaves behind is choking the bureaucracy. However, the newly formed task force to take on Death Sticks has a loose cannon officer who doesn't always play by the rules. The team also features a nerdy pencil-pushing bookkeeper, probably Kevin Hart, and through an unlikely and probably plot-force set of circumstances, they have to track down Elan together and stop the wave of death latte addiction and murders swarming over the city. Worst of all, Alonzo seems to know all of Elan's next moves because the Kingpin's behavior curiously reminds him of his long-lost and presumed dead brother. Or something like that. I don't know. I haven't thought about it very much. Leslye said she was going to show a different perspective in The Acolyte during an interview for the June edition of Empire magazine. If you go back and read any of the marketing material for this show, it is all such a lie. This article specifically describes a show and characters that were not present in any way in Leslie's story. They kept teasing a Wookiee Jedi, and he did nothing. We were told it would be a murder mystery, but the mystery was solved for us in the first episode. Leslye says in that article, quote, "I was driven to write a story that essentially was from the perspective of the bad guys." What is she talking about? This show is almost entirely centered on the Jedi. Oh, wait, okay, I see what she's doing here. The Jedi are the bad guys that she's talking. I'm sorry, I can't even fake interest. This is the most immature, trite idea for a story. Somewhere, some 7th grade boys are sitting around spitballing stories, and one of them just had that same thought, and his friends immediately told him it was dumb, because even they see how shallow that is. But she continues, quote, "I write that way in my other work. I'm always attracted to amoral or immoral characters, and finding the humanity within the villains." Just like with her comment on Khmer's freedom speech being so humanizing, she's completely missing the point of showing humanity in villains. The reason we portray very human and relatable villains is not to call their villainy into question or to attempt to justify them somehow, but to remind us that we are also human, and that could be us. Often these villains will get an origin story that is not outlandish or insane. In Falling Down, William Foster has devoted his life to a dull job, thinking he's working toward a dream, supporting a system which he has labeled good. But as this worldview unravels, he's nothing left to tether him to humanity. In 2019's Joker, we see a similar figure, someone living a dead-end life, and after one tragic event on one bad day, suddenly they snap and become detached from reality. These characters are not meant to be justified, but instead to terrify us and make us question what we are living for. What are we doing? And cause us to wonder just how close we are to having one bad day that turns us into a villain. If it can happen to these regular people, can it happen to you? A mustache-twirling, comically evil villain can be fun sometimes. It can serve as a foil to the hero of the story. But relatable, humanized villains? Villains who, despite not wanting to, you might agree with just a little? They're a foil for us and our self-image. That is their job. But Leslye missed that point harder than everything but the girl misses you when she asked, "But what if the bad guy is hot, though?"
And he's got a big knob.
Ultimately, The Acolyte failed to explore morality in any meaningful way. Where other stories like Training Day or Clockwork Orange raise uncomfortable questions about justice, accountability, and the nature of evil, Leslie's vision boils down to feelings equal good. The lack of nuance or real stakes in her good guy bad, bad guy good narrative leaves viewers with nothing to ponder or care about. Great storytelling makes us question ourselves and our world. The Acolyte made us question what the hell is happening internally at Disney. I hope these other examples, along with The Acolyte, do make you start asking some questions. We should be examining the stories that we take in, what they're telling us about the world, and asking if it's a good idea to consume this type of material regularly. Picking apart ethical quandaries can be a fun time and spark engaging discussions, but is it wise to fill our visual diet with stories that essentially tell us there is no such thing as good and evil? Is it healthy for us to seek out stories where the traditional good guys are consistently revealed to be hiding dark behaviors and attitudes behind their pious moral facade, while the traditional villains are consistently revealed to have a softer side, sympathetic reasons for their villainy? We should ask ourselves if we find this compelling because it examines the complexities of human nature, or if we're simply numbing the sting of our own consciences, attempting to feel better relative to the new, lower standard that is being offered. Even more importantly, do we think this is appropriate for children? Criticism about the infantile writing of modern Star Wars is often met with the rebuttal that the franchise is for 12-year-old boys. The creator himself said so. On both levels, we should question the visual diet being fed to the youth, inspecting its quality and substance. Can kids be served low-caliber productions? Or should we be aiming even higher, considering that this audience is in its formative stage of life? With that in mind, are we content to raise young adults on the idea that right and wrong is merely in the eye of the beholder? Should behaviors be comically exaggerated in order to show these young viewers the clear line between hero and villain? Or should we show children that, as Leslye stated, you can see yourself as the bad guy and there's still good in you, and you can see yourself as the good guy and there's still a little bit of bad? Why do so many entertainment products now insist that established institutions and our parents are wrong and stupid and probably secretly evil? Admittedly, the framing of those questions makes my position clear, but you should ponder these types of inquiries regarding what you take in consistently. Now, this last thing, this is straight up advice. In this section, we looked at some questions famous movies have asked, and oftentimes one of those is, to what extent does your environment play a role in the choices that you can make? While it's fun to wonder what the correct decision would be if you got tricked into smoking PCP and then coerced into being an accomplice in murder and armed robbery, most of us probably won't ever be in such an extreme circumstance. In our everyday lives, I hope that you continually come back to the conclusion that external forces have near zero control over you. I'm going to try a different angle here because sometimes people think that I'm being mean and accusatory when I say that everything in your life is your responsibility and blaming society is useless, and the way to build confidence is to just do stuff, because then you will have done stuff. Sometimes I think I'm in the wrong line of work. Elegant profundity like that should be on a motivational poster. But I'll use other language because I'm not being mean. I'm trying to encourage you by reminding you of your own agency. When you assign blame somewhere else, you could be correct, I don't know. But when you say that you can't do something because of them and they have to change before you can do it, well, now you've not just assigned blame, but you've also willingly handed over your responsibility and agency. And I don't recommend that because most thems don't seem to be able to handle responsibility very well, do they? Them is usually pretty terrible. So why are we basing our decisions on them? We shouldn't. And I will continue to remind you in these little segments that you have the agency and the power to choose what you are going to do. You are in control of you, and them should be told to go eat a whole bag of dicks. I'm glad you stuck around, and I hope that today's video explains more of why The Acolyte feels so flat and why it's hard to get invested in. Since the show sucks so much, I would instead like today's outro question to be, what is your favorite morally complex movie, and why? What are its most interesting questions? The previous video in this series is going to be right here, and the next video will appear over here after it gets posted. All 4 parts will be in the description. I appreciate you watching, and I'll see you next time.